Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm going to be bringing you my end of May wrap up. Before we get to the books that I read at the end of May, I wanted to do my bit to provide some resources and some information for the Black Lives Matter movement. I understand that my voice is not the most important one right now by any stretch of the imagination, but this is a platform like any other and I've been very vocal on a lot of my other social media channels, so I wanted to also be more vocal on this platform as it probably actually has the highest number of people that directly engage with me of everything that I do online. Down below in the description there are a bunch of links to various places that you can go to support more in whatever way that you can, whether it be donations or petitions or more directly active, also including information like writing to your local MP and other things like that. There's some for the US and also the UK. I've also linked some information about some black owned bookstores that you can go to buy resources to educate yourself better about what is happening, and I am including myself within this as well. This channel, or myself, because I am this channel, I don't think I've been particularly good in the past at reading the range of books that I should have been reading and I could have been reading, and it's something that I would like to address going forward, so you can expect a fairly hefty book haul coming soon. So I just wanted to put that out there now because it is important to speak about these things when you have the ability to speak, and it's important to use my position of privilege to try and help and amplify wherever I can. So bunch of links down below, please do go check them out. On an entirely unrelated note, I'm actually going to be pulling back on the amount of content I'm making going forward. I'm going back to my old schedule of 2 videos a week rather than 3. It's been fun in lockdown to try and make 3 videos a week, but I'm getting major burnout on just like the editing process alone, so I'm going to be going back to my Thursday Sunday scheduling of 2 a week, just in case anyone was wondering at the dip in content from my end. Hardly particularly important, but I wanted to let you guys know what you can expect from me coming forward. So we have a ridiculously huge wrap up that I'm going to try and keep as brief as I can because I'm still feeling a little bit burned out about filming, but I wanted to get this up before it became halfway through June and I had a different wrap up that I had to do. So what did I read? The first book I read is The Summer Queen by Elizabeth Chadwick. This is a historical fiction that is looking at the life of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who is considered one of history's most powerful women. She was alive in the 1100s and she married several different very influential men as well, and was mother to Richard the Lionheart and was involved in a lot of the Crusades. The second or third Crusades, I believe. There were a lot of Crusades historically. This is a really fun historical fiction that is very much following along with her life and not trying to make any major twists to it, but rather just kind of vocalizing and putting a narrative form over the top of her life. So it almost has that blend between fact and fiction. It's also part of a trilogy because her life was fairly impressive and very long. I really enjoyed it. The author does a really nice job at the end as well of talking about where in Eleanor's life she took liberties with the exact sources that we have and where she stuck far more strictly to what we know about her, because funnily enough, you know, somebody from the 1100s, it's a little difficult to know exactly what happened in certain times. It's really interesting and really good fun, and it was nice to read a historical fiction that was that bit further back in time because I do tend to read a lot of stuff around the Victorian era, so it was interesting to read something from a lot earlier. The next book, I'm just going in chronological order because otherwise I'm going to forget some. So the next book that I finished, or I had read to me, was Biggles Takes the Case by W.E. Johns. My parents and I have been taking it in turns to read books to each other over Zoom since the lockdowns happened, and Andy decided to join in for this particular book. Biggles is a fighter pilot. It's like a series of middle grade books that were written a little while ago now. There's a lot of like First World War and Second World War pilot action happening. Biggles Takes the Case is a collection of short stories focused on Biggles and his kind of main characters around him. I'm not a huge fan of the Biggles books. This is very much Andy's cup of tea, but you know, it was nice to have it read to me, and I know that they are a key part of his childhood, so it was interesting to listen to them, and I think they're stronger in shorter story form just because the kind of very A, B, C style of the plots is less apparent. Then I read The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Treuer. I will link down below my BookTube Prize Round 2 video where I talk about that book and the 5 other books I read for that in more detail, because if I talk about it here it's going to go on for way too long. Then I read Humankind by Rutger Bregman. This is a hopeful history. This is a non-fiction. It's actually translated non-fiction, which has been really interesting. That's been creeping into my reading entirely by accident, which is a lovely thing to have. This is a reimagining of, or a rework understanding of the history of humankind, with a focus on compassion and kindness being our major driving factor as to how we've done so well in the world, compared to the idea of it being our competitiveness and our kind of savagery. It's a relook at some of the prehistoric evidence we have for either argument, as well as some of the psychological studies that were very big in the 60s, like Zimbardo's prison experiment and Milgram's electric shock experiment, that get dragged out as ways of proving how cruel and horrible we are as human beings. And then it has a lot of stuff going forward, looking at how we understand the world today and the role of things like the media and social media and politicians, and the ways that divides can happen. I think it's a very timely book and a very important book, and I really would recommend it to a lot of people. I think it can really help to discuss some of the framework around how certain politicians have got very big recently. I also have a book review for this on this channel that I will link down below as well. That description box is going to be full today, so feel free to check that out if you want my thoughts on this in more detail. And thank you Bloomsbury for sending me a free copy. Then I read Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a light-hearted rom-com with a parallel universe vibe over the top. It's a turning point for a young woman who has pretty much had the rug pulled out from underneath her and goes back to live kind of in her hometown, and she either goes out, kind of stays out with an old flame, or goes home with her mates, and then it's about the branching off points that happen there. It was cute and fun, but because of the branching off points, neither story was really fully developed, and it was very on the nose with a lot of how it was discussing the idea of these turning points and which storyline ended up being better and what should she get from the two relationships. I think if you are interested in parallel universes and want to like that multiverse split idea, and you want a better a book that does it better, basically, I check out the versions of Us instead by Lara Barnett. This one just felt a little bit twee and cloying in places, and I don't think it's particularly the strongest example of this out there. Then I read World War Z by Max Brooks. This I listened to an audiobook because so World War Z is a fairly well-known zombie horror book. It's kind of one of the key examples of its genre, and I really enjoyed this one actually. It's an oral history, so I listened to an audiobook because the whole book is written in the form of like transcripts and interviews and like news reporting and things like that, and it's imagining a world where a zombie virus outbreak happens, and it's about how does the world immediately deal with that, and then also the war that happens with the zombies after the outbreak has really spread, to try and claw back some of the land from them, and it spans a 20-year period. It was genuinely very, very interesting. It's less of like, it's not very character focused because you do bounce from different people, so you've got kind of generals from different and like various military leaders from different parts of the world, scientists from different parts of the world, soldiers who are down on the ground, things like that, people who have set up various communes and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's not got that story in that sense. It really reads more like a non-fiction about a zombie apocalypse rather than it being like a fictional survivalist account, but I really enjoyed that feature of it. I thought it was very interesting, and now that we are living through a pandemic, I think the early parts of the pandemic were very accurate as to how things have gone in our world. So that one a little on the nose in places, but then obviously the people infected come back to life and start eating people, and then that removed it from reality enough that it was an actually enjoyable read. Then I read The Ends of the World by Peter Brannen. This is a non-fiction that is looking at the big 5 major extinction events that have happened in Earth's history, and in doing so is a really lovely snapshot look at the Earth's history, going all the way back to the earliest examples of life, meaning like bacteria, going all the way forward. It's no secret on this channel that I love paleontology and dinosaurs, but this really is going way earlier than those, and was a fascinating read. It timed quite nicely because I recently watched David Attenborough's The First Life, or First Signs of Life, which is a documentary about exactly this topic, like what are the earliest signs of life. So it was very nice to have these two kind of combined together, and it's been nice to broaden my interest in paleontology beyond just the flashier dinosaurs that are very popular. Peter Brannen has a great writing style. It's very light-hearted, there's a lot of humour in it. He's a journalist writing about science rather than a scientist as well, which means that there's some really nice layman's descriptions of exactly how the science works, and you do get to see some lovely banter about the different kinds of paleontology out there, and how basically paleontologists who study dinosaurs are like marine biologists who study dolphins. You're just in it for the flash. You can't have a book that talks about extinction events given how many of them have come down to increases in carbon in our atmosphere without talking about exactly what is happening in terms of climate change right now. So it is important to remember that going in, but it was a really hopeful look at that as well, because it was discussing the idea that we still have plenty of time to make change and we should be making those changes, but also even if we are barreling towards a mass extinction event, the Earth will still be fine. It's just that we personally as a species will not survive it. And I found that a weirdly lovely silver lining. Then I read The Sewing Machine by Natalie Fergie. This is a historical fiction set in several different time periods, because it's spanning 4 generations, but the earliest one is the very early 1900s, and then it goes forward to modern day, and it is focused around this particular sewing machine, which is a hand sewing machine, and it's about the person who made it and then how it gets kind of handed down, and the various ties of the different generations do loop together. It was a little, again, kind of twee, cute, cloying in places. I wasn't overly bothered by it. I did enjoy how it wrapped itself up at the end, and I thought it worked that quite nicely, and I was pleased because that definitely was a redeeming factor of it. But because you had so many different generations going along, I really didn't feel like we got to know any of the particular characters, and it had a little bit like a historical romance edge to it, but without being able to build up any of the romances because you were like breezing through their life so quickly. So it was cute and fun, and if you're someone who really likes sewing and fabric craft, I think there are lots of little nods in there that you'll appreciate greatly from that, like myself. But if you're just looking for a historical fiction book, I think that there are much better examples out there than this. Then I read The Eagle and Crane by, just Eagle and Crane by Suzanne Rindell. This was really the month of historical fiction, the 2 weeks of historical fiction, because that's what this one is. This is set in, it's kind of got 2 timelines going on. There's the one going on that is in the 1940s, specifically in 1940, and it is an FBI agent investigating the case of a couple of people who have run away from the Japanese kind of internment camps that were a big thing in America, and then potentially investigating in a plane crash that might have killed them. But then you also have alongside that an earlier timeline which is looking at one of the guys who was in the plane crash and his white friend who have come from like rival families, but they run away and join a flying circus, or a barnstorming troupe, which is what they're apparently called, which is basically people doing shows with planes and pilots, like wing walks and things like that, and then offering rides to people in the plane as a way of making money. There's a love triangle going on between the 2 gentlemen and the young lady who they kind of run away with on this particular flying circus trip, and there's a whole bunch of different discussions going on there, as well as discussions about race and what it was like to be Japanese in America around the time of Pearl Harbor, and also just before that, and the particular racism that the character Haruto, who has the anglicised Harry as his name, goes through. It was really immersive and kind of very rich and atmospheric. I really enjoyed the characters and the writing style, and I loved the time period, and I loved the way of writing about being on the road. It also made me like super nostalgic for when I briefly toured with the circus, so that was very lovely for me from a personal perspective. I think this is a really wonderful example of historical fiction, and it's definitely a fan favourite. Might be a new favourite of the year, to be honest. I devoured it in a day and loved it. And then one of the last books that I read in the month was The Little Sister by Raymond Chandler. This is a classic. It's kind of crime noir. It's one of Chandler's Philip Marlowe series. I've read a couple of these before and they're really good fun. It's very sort of classic 1950s gangster heist style books. There's always lots of like dames and broads and all sorts of corruption and drugs and all sorts of exciting things like that. The thing that really sells the Raymond Chandler's for me is Raymond Chandler's writing style. Philip Marlowe is a PI or private investigator who gets dragged into all sorts of complicated cases, and he's a very jaded soul who generally is sick of the world and has a wonderful turn of phrase with it. So I really appreciate the writing style in particular. They are quite similar. Now, having read 3 of them, it's quite difficult to pinpoint out like any particular plot points from this one compared to the others. In a similar similar way that if you like, say, Agatha Christie or the Sherlock Holmes, each case does start to run itself into the other, but you're here for the characters and the writing style rather than the plot in itself. I also listened to this on audiobook, and there's a series, I think he's done all of them actually. It's by Ray Porter, is the narrator on Audible, and they are absolutely fantastic because he really gets that kind of slightly aggressive, biting, jaded tone to Raymond Chandler's character Philip Marlowe right in my eyes, so I really enjoyed that. Okay, and then the last books I want to talk about is actually one big series, and that's the Midnight Braid series by Lara Adrian. I've been doing a bit of a reread and then a continuation of this series. It's paranormal romance focused on the Breed, which is like Lara Adrian's version of vampires, but they are an alien species that crash landed here on Earth a very, very long time ago and bred with humans to create the Breed, who do drink blood and can't be out in the sun but are more human than your standard vampire myth. The standard romance model is each book focuses on a different couple, and the women in it are humans, but they're called breed mates, and they have a specific mark on them that basically says they have the particular genetic makeup that means that they can breed and live with the vampires and share their blood, which makes them immortal, and that's the general storyline from there. There's a big bad, because there always is going on in these ones, and I think at last time I spoke to you guys I had read up to book 5 maybe. I've now got up to book 13 with a bunch of novellas in there as well. Basically it was going to be a bit of a reread up to book 8 or 9, and then I stopped. I read them as a teenager and I've come back to them. What happens is there's a resolution of the big bad in book 10, which I'm a little bit annoyed that I didn't finish as a teenager, because I think that would have made it more satisfactory for me. But you finish that one, and then from book 11 onwards it's 20 years later, looking at the ramifications of what happens at the end of book 10, and with that comes a whole new cast of characters, because you've got the next generation and basically the warriors' kids that you get to, who are now fully grown, and you get to interact with them. So I really appreciated that, like hitting a reset on the series without needing to fully do an entire new series, and you've still got all the world building and there's a different big bad going on. Generally I'm really enjoying them. I think they're good fun, and I think the reset was a good way of reinvigorating the storylines, which was excellent. I'm not going to talk about each one separately. What I'm probably going to do is when I finish the entire series, is do a tier ranking of all the books and the novellas. I think I've got about 6 left, including novellas in there, to finish it. I've kind of pulled away from the series a little bit right now, but I'll probably jump back in towards the end of the month and finish that off. That I think is it from me. Quite a long wrap up. There's been a lot of reading, obviously, because that's all there ever is at the moment, so I don't think I've missed any, fingers crossed. I hope you are having a wonderful reading week, and do remember there's a bunch of links down below. Please do check out anything you can about the Black Lives Matter movement and support in any way that you can. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.